So good morning, everybody. My name is Vanessa Gerard. I am from Sacramento City Unified School District. I'm the Director of Multilingual Instruction there. And my colleague?
Karen Lynn Nieves from San Joaquin County Office of Education, Director of Multilingual Education.
We're really pleased to be here with you today because we're on our personal crusade for helping our districts and our county really implement integrated and designated ELD. I've been doing ELD instruction both with kids and then later with adults for 20 years, and nothing this exciting has come by in the time that I've been doing that.
Word.
Okay. So we're here to share with you about both integrated and designated ELD. And we're going to do that by sharing with you some scenarios and vignettes. In the general session, the three writers of the framework talked about how the fact that they were getting feedback from the focus groups, like, don't just tell us how, show us. And I'd like to just go and shake the hands of the people who said that, because by far in my district, what has resonated with the district staff, the teachers, the principals with whom I've worked are the scenarios and vignettes. And so we're going to be using those as a way of sharing with you about this, and we hope that will help bring it alive for you. We will do our very best to have some time at the end for questions and answers, because this is a topic that is wrought with many, many questions and maybe even concerns. All right. So, these helpful tools from the framework are the vignettes and scenarios and all the readings. Every time we do professional learning around the framework, we get into the framework and we read something from it. Whether it's a scenario, a vignette, or just an excerpt from one of the chapters, it's very well written. And as I think Pam said, it's written for teaching and learning. And I hope that you'll find it equally as helpful. So this is a quote straight from the framework. All teachers should attend to the language learning needs of their ELs in strategic ways that promote the simultaneous development of content knowledge and advanced levels of English. ELD instruction uses the California ELD standards in two ways, integrated and designated ELD. And you'll notice that "and" is italicized and bolded because, as Pam talked about, this is not a choice. Although I have had some people say, we're going to start with this, fill in the blank. But it's not as though, oh, now we can just do integrated ELD and we can check the box, right? This is really a concentrated effort on making sure that English learners, and quite frankly, many other students in some ways, get the language instruction they need during integrated ELD for sure for all students, and then during designated ELD for ELs in order to really take advantage of the Common Core standards. Pam went over this graphic at length, and so we're not going to spend too much time on it. If you have not had a chance to get into the ELD standards, or you've seen them but not really dug into them, I encourage you to do so. They are a breath of fresh air. They are so specific that I tell the schools, we have some schools in our district that do not have high numbers of English learners, but I tell them dig into those nevertheless, because they amplify the language demands that are present in the Common Core. And for many, many teachers like myself who are monolingual, we sometimes accept language as just part of it. You know, that Francis Christie's call it the hidden curriculum, right? We just use it. We just use it. The ELD standards do an awful lot to help us know what is it about language that we need to teach kids, because I think we all recognize that it's a necessary item in our curriculum. But what is it that we teach? The ELD standards will give us huge leaps forward in knowing what to teach students so that they can really use it and become the effective communicators that we hope. So the two parts of the standards that we'll be attending to, of course, we always know we have to use English purposefully. And that's why I am constantly in a sort of a, what's the word I want? I'm testifying all the time I'm testifying all the time as to, let's throw away those grammar books that are totally separate from what you're doing in the rest of class, right? We need all this language instruction to be purposeful. Now, we might do some grammar instruction that's very specific, but it's going to be in the context of what we're doing with all of our ELA instruction. So we have two parts of the ELD standards, the meaningful interaction piece, which I love this too. So collaborating with others, you can't be more Common Core than that, right? Interpreting meaning takes place of the old listening and reading, because when you're receiving a message, whether you're receiving it orally or you're reading it, we want kids to do what? Interpret it, make their own understandings around this content. And so I love the way they've labeled that. And then, of course, producing meaningful messages, whether they be oral messages, written messages, nonverbal messages, etc. And then my personal favorite in the English language development standards, the knowledge of language. This is where we grammar geeks live. This is such powerful instruction, and it's not about noun-verb agreement. Or maybe I should say, not only about noun-verb agreement, okay? This is about teaching kids how to put language together so that they can successfully get their message across in a way that is the most effective because it meets the expectations of the genre in which they're working. So we've moved beyond just, is it correct? But is it most powerfully put? Are they able to find someone's wonderful message? I just did a little PL on one of Churchill's Blood, Sweat, Toil, and Tears speech. Very short, but packed with meaning. Can they get the meaning that he intended there? Can they really grab all of it, and can they produce it based on the way that it's written? And this is what this part of the standards will do for you.
Perfect overview and segue into, let's look at the framework. Let's start with integrated ELD, and let's see what it has to tell us. So first what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you a little story, and this story takes place in the 5th grade vignette, and then we're going to look a little at the text and the big ideas in Chapter 2 of the framework around integrated ELD. So my story starts with Mr. Rodriguez in 5th grade, and he is modeling a unit on integrated ELA literacy with integrated ELD, an integrated unit, and science instruction. The class is studying ecosystems, and his goal is that they're going to write science informational research reports. So what does he do first? He gets into that teaching and learning cycle. To produce at the end, we've got to start by building that deep, deep, deep content knowledge in the beginning. So they're engaging in building the student's knowledge of, he starts by choosing a local ecosystem, which is freshwater, and then later they're going to select their own. He models the process of researching to build those scientific conceptual knowledge about ecosystems, and also, so important, develop the understanding of how science texts are written, because they're going to eventually write that written report. So he's teaching them how to conduct the research, and doing multimedia presentations. That was the background. Then to get into the context where they talk about all the different activities that are going on in this unit that they're engaging in. So the teacher's doing tons of read aloud of informational text. They're focusing on the domain-specific vocabulary above, pulling in Spanish cognates, especies, predador. They're looking at the academic vocabulary, despite, restore, etc. They're taking walking field trips, up there on the top, where they observe, assess, and experiment about everyday materials that filter dirty water the best, so actual hands-on activities. Then they're going to start looking at some mentor text to go back into teaching. They're moving into that, looking at the modeled writing, where they're in the direction they're going to head when they do their research. And if that's not all, then, so we did the background, we got into building the background knowledge, and now there's like a signature practice in here. And in this particular vignette, it's the text reconstruction activity. If any of you have engaged in this, fabulous. If you're not familiar with text reconstruction, the teacher reads a short text. See how it's a little bit longer than that. Short text while the students just listen the first time. Second time, the teacher rereads and the students take notes. jot down little quick notes, but that they need to be pre-taught how to take notes, right? Third time through, they're going to reconstruct the text with a partner. So I got some notes, you got some notes. Now we're going to put our notes together, and we're going to try to replicate what we heard. The teacher then is walking around the room, circulating, listening for to provide that just in time, in the moment scaffolding as needed. Then they're going to look at the actual text and compare with a partner. What did our text look like in comparison to this? Notice. And then finally, you have this nice text then to do that further work that Vanessa was saying, how much she loves. You're looking at the warm standards, looking at grammar. How were those words put together? How is this expressed? Deconstructing for meaning and as well as for grammatical points. As if text construction was not enough, then they end this vignette, the integrated vignette, with letters to the editor. Does Mr. Rodriguez just say, hey, now we're going to write letters to the editor because we learned so much about, how dirty the water is here? Of course he does not. He gets back into that teaching and learning cycle, builds background knowledge about the letters to the editor by having them actually look at letters to the editor. Then how do you persuade? Looking at the model, looking at the text type, breaking it down, writing one together, that joint construction piece, and then eventually collaboratively in groups, they're going to write a letter. So all that in about 2.5 pages. So many ideas. It says it's 5th grade, but as you'll note, as you read the vignettes, you can use these across grade levels. I think it's time to go into an activity about integrated ELD, which means we have our friends passing out. So when these go out, you want to make sure that you have a partner with a pink piece of paper and a yellow piece of paper. So
not you have one, but
yes.
you and a partner each have a different color.
You each have a, sorry. Next slide. Okay, so for this activity, we're going to pull some big ideas from the framework. So you're going to work with a partner. We're going to do a literacy activity called split dictation activity from Pauline Gibbons. I had been calling it a cooperative close all these years, and then I saw in the literature, she calls it split dictation, so I like that. So as I said, you're going to work collaboratively with a partner. One person will have yellow and one person will have pink, or A and B. Each of you has different information that's missing. So your job is to figure out how you're going to work together to get all the pieces you need for this text to then read it as a whole. So if you're partner A, maybe you have this word missing. So you'll need to work together to decide how you're going to get that word in there, like by talking to your partner and working. If you're partner B, you've got this word missing. So you're going to work with partner A, etc. So fill in the text and then reread it together for the big ideas. So why would we do this with students? What would be the purpose of an activity like this? Beth? And they, more miles on the tongue. They each have information that the other one needs to do the next activity. Do you think kids, Lisa?
Question. So are we assuming that this is like notes that a student has taken and the person next to him took notes and that they each have blanks and they're filling in from their own notes, or
no? This is the teacher's got it, and she or he has some wild purpose. Maybe we've taken out the domain-specific vocabulary. Maybe we're working on, whatever we're working on, that could be, so you could purposely do the close, right? It could be random, it could be purposeful. Maybe it's transitions. What? Purposeful is better. Purposeful, yeah, as opposed to random, but sometimes random can be fun too. So you have to set it up so the kids don't just lay the paper next to each other and don't talk. That would not be the purpose. And it's, then you do something else with it, but it's another way to get a piece of text in kids' hands. I have done this grades, I think the lowest I've gone is 2nd grade to 12th grade. They love it, it's fun, it's interactive. It's just a different way than just giving me the text, here it all is, right? Any other thoughts about purpose?
I thought about process, and sorry if I'm a little slow, I'll stay in recess. But for what we ended up doing was spending the whole time talking about how we were going to do this without just reading it through to each other or looking at each other.
And could you just read it to each other? Would that be okay?
It depends on the purpose. I mean, as an instructor, if I set this up, I would have a purpose for it. And when I didn't catch up. So I didn't know what the purpose was to try to set up a process that would then lead us to meet the objective.
So a big idea is just getting another way to get some text in front of our kids. That can be a little fun. F words back in vogue. We're having fun again.
I think speaking of purpose of this sort of work, it's very rich in introducing vocabulary that's going to be key for understanding the unit or the phrase or the paragraph you're about to read. It also engages a partner working, which increases responsibility on task behavior. Kids has a job to do. And when I was listening for the word, I really was attending to that for the word. So it helped me also listen for pronunciation. So there's quite a bit of benefit just with this activity to increase the literacy, I think.
And in her book, Pauline has like 20 other ways, that you can purposely set this up and plan for it. Other grapho.
Can I?
Yes, of course.
Another,
Vanessa, you have to ask me for permission.
I see this as a valuable way in that you're building the field and the content knowledge along with language. So we have left this idea that you're going to learn content and then learn language, or learn the language first and then the content, whichever way you've heard about it, or way back when, behind, and we're going for simultaneous learning. And this kind of talking, deciding which words are missing, especially if they have been intentionally chosen for a purpose, helps kids with building the field of the content area that they are studying while they're dealing with the language. So this might be something I might encounter in my instruction, or plan for in my instruction, early on, like in a unit or a chapter, right? So we're trying to get this text in front of them, get them to use these words a little bit. You might even say something like, if one of the words that's missing from your or your partner's text is unknown to one of you, see if you can hash it out, But this is a way of getting that content and language instruction in simultaneously, so that we are not leaving one behind in favor of the other. Yeah. So Karen just described an integrated ELD series of lessons, really. There was more than one lesson there between the split dictation activity, the text reconstruction, okay? So that same teacher now, in my vignette, because for every grade level, there is a vignette on integrated ELD and a vignette on designated ELD, and it takes the same piece, which is so beautiful. So one of the teachers, this is a team of teachers who is engaging in this ecosystem unit. This is the best way. Collaboration is a huge theme throughout the framework. We're not just talking about kids collaborating, but teachers collaborating, and principals collaborating, and district and county staffs collaborating, et cetera. So as these teachers have been collaborating, one teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, the same teacher who did this, notices that particularly for his kids, his EL kids who are at the bridging level, they are having problems with connectives in texts. They're not recognizing them when they're reading them as a way of tying ideas together and creating cohesion throughout the text. And when they're writing, they're not using them. So they're not giving their readers a heads up by saying consequently, oh, this is going to be cause and effect, everyone. Pay attention. Or however, I'm going to introduce some ideas that are different than what I've just talked about. So he sees this as a gap in his kids' knowledge right now and wants to help shore this up. So he has them take a piece of text, such as the one at the top about wetlands, and he begins the process by pointing out some text connectives, such as however and unfortunately. And they begin to build an anchor chart of these kinds of connectives. And this is an example of the anchor chart that he would have in his classroom, so that kids are understanding not just this is a way of connecting text, but this is a way of giving your reader a heads up about what's coming next, and it ties the new idea to the old idea, which builds cohesion. Has anyone here ever read a paper written by an English learner that lacks cohesion? Okay, so one of the things we really want to help them do is think about these ideas. So he takes this lesson on, and he does it in the teaching and learning cycle, in which in the beginning, he's pointing out and saying, oh, however, Oh, I know there's going to be some information coming up that's in contrast to the next information or the last information we just read. And then he's asking kids to point out some of the connectives, and then they turn to their partners and begin telling them what those connectives mean, right? Because this is a gradual release of responsibility, and what we want eventually are English learners who are fully independent in using these grammatical resources to build cohesion in their own writing, or to be able to recognize it in some maybe poorly written textbooks to which we are all exposed to, okay? So he's doing this, and eventually then, his intent is that when they work on the culminating task, the letter to the editor in the case of the whole class instruction, they are using these connectives to help make their communication, their message more effective. And then from then on, as they begin to read more and more complex texts and get in higher and higher grades, these will be easier for them to comprehend. They will learn new ones. You know, these kinds of anchor charts should always have space at the bottom for you to add stuff, right? It's never a done deal. And people are always finding new ways of using words, and we need to be aware of it. So that's what's going on in a designated ELD class. And because he is working with a collaborative team, he has some kids coming in from another class to work on this with him, because they're doing this in their class too, so it makes sense to everybody. He could not do that if they were not collaborating. Okay?
So is this paragraph here coming from the text reconstruction and then the designated ELD teachers deconstructing it, or is this?
It doesn't necessarily, did we use the same piece of text? It doesn't necessarily need to be the same piece of text, because you're going to be, in a unit such as freshwater ecosystems, you're going to be reading multiple pieces of informational text, right? So it could, but it doesn't have to. Yeah. Okay, I forgot to say, I was supposed to say it when we came back from that activity, because we're holding questions to the end for the most part, please be sure to jot them down, because we don't want you to forget. Okay, and we have like 2 minutes designated for questions, so we'll be able to. I'm just kidding. Okay.
Stay after.
Right.
It's Tom.
All right. This is the other activity that Karen alluded to. Before you begin, I have my teaching chops. I still get into classrooms. I'd like everyone to pay attention to me for just a second, please. We are going to ask you to complete a T-chart on what ELD is and what ELD is not. You are going to do that by by designating each partner has a role, what it is and what it is not. You are going to read the same excerpt, which is the yellow sheet of paper. Is that correct?
Backside.
The backside of the yellow sheet of paper, or no, just the backside of both sheets of paper.
Both sheets of paper. Same color.
Just turn yours over. See how well she planned this? And you're going to read it and mark down what you believe ELD is, if you're the is person, or what it is not, if you're the is not person. And when you're done, you're going to share your interpretations of this reading. We heard some very lively conversations. The energy level was quite high. Is there anything from this reading activity that you think the whole group might benefit from, an idea that you had or a question that you had about this activity? No? Okay.
Robert, he looks like he wants to say something.
It's reading with a purpose, right? So right from the start, I know I'm looking for the knots. So they're focusing.
And then
You're so negative, Robert.
Well, and then once again, if you have different roles when reading, your partner has something you need, right? And this is a wonderful way for kids to be able to communicate with a purpose. Beyond just my purpose, which is I want you to know all about designated ELD, right? So whenever we can give partners different roles, but they need each other, the roles are interdependent, this often helps us build for good communication. And I just did a little workshop with a whole bunch of secondary teachers and principals on Thursday. And they were talking about getting the kids interested enough in the content to really pursue using some of the conversation skills that we were talking about, like asking for clarification and asking for evidence, et cetera, and how we can help develop really thoughtful prompts that will do that, because it's really important. And I can say as a generalization, certainly not as a rule, but as a generalization, the older the kids get, the harder it is. And because, you know, first graders just want to talk because you want them to talk, you know. And then as we get up, we really have to find clear and engaging prompts, is something that Jeff Zweers calls out. So this is an example of that kind of activity. And can I ask, what did you learn, if anything, around integrated or designated ELD through doing these activities? Yes?
You're talking about how easy it is in the EL, that designated time, to slip into teaching foundational skills, and the emphasis here on not doing that.
Yeah.
And
Very
teaching
clearly
foundational
stated.
skills.
Underline it with your staff.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Can you elaborate on the don't do that during designated time? Because I am still not.
Well, I think one of the ideas is that foundational skills are not necessarily the emphasis on language that we need, and that there are many students who need foundational skills, so you don't take up EL's ELD time to teach that to them, because chances are, if kids are missing foundational skills, then it's not necessarily only your English learners who are doing that. And in fact, they've done all sorts of studies. Certainly, understanding more English is more helpful for reading comprehension. But when you're a newcomer in kindergarten, first grade, you can understand that C says k, right, and get some foundational skills. Then are there any other fourth grade students who don't read and write well? Do it during a reading and writing time. If you're doing it during ELD, they're not getting their core. They're not getting the language in ELD that they need to be able to access the core. So, and maybe we have kids who are part of two special groups, right? We have kids who need help in this and in that. So if we are, I think in some ways it may not always be explicit, but the framework is really wrapped around this idea that you're not doing whole class instruction all the time, right? You're doing some kind of a model in which you can get to groups and deal with whatever needs that they need. And I would say that foundational skills, unless there's a language confusion, need to be a foundational skills group, and so that you're not missing out on the ELD that would happen to help give them access to the core. And also, there are gray areas everywhere, and that makes this really tricky. Let me just say that. Trying to draw lines is tough. So what we're doing, we're telling people, use your head, be intentional, right? When you're saying, I'm going to do this in integrated and this in designated, if someone comes up to you and says, why, you have a purpose for it. Okay, it'd be intentional.
So I would say we'll hold questions till the end because we want to get to the snapshots. Mm-hmm. And then we'll stay after a few minutes into lunch, won't we, Vanessa?
No, I'm hungry.
Oh, never mind. Okay, I will stay after because I've already got someone in the room.
They need snapshots.
Snapshots.
Okay, but before we do that, we'll just tell them. We have brought 6 snapshots at varying grade levels from transitional kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. You get what you get and you don't get upset unless you want to trade with somebody, okay? Yes. You can trade, that's fine. But you have to be with a person who doesn't have the same snapshot. You're going to read your snapshots because we are sold on the utility of these snapshots and vignettes in helping practitioners see what the framework looks like. So we wanted to give you an opportunity to do this. So we're going to ask you to read your snapshot. Your snapshot may be a snapshot of integrated ELD, or it may be designated ELD. It's a mixed bunch. And what we'd like to ask you to do is annotate while you read and keep these 4 ideas in mind. Or is it integrated or designated? You can tell that from reading the title. Lesson topic, what's the language focus? And look at this. This is the biggie. What's the connection between the language focus and the core lesson? That's the biggie. Okay? And then you are going to, when you've both finished reading and annotating, you're going to share your snapshot with your partner, and because you've read 2 different ones, you'll both be enlightened about 2 snapshots.
So now you've had another layer of understanding. We're building, I heard the artichoke. Peeling back the layers. Jen up front had a great question earlier that you might also be wondering. Snapshots versus vignettes, if you're not familiar with them. Snapshot, little picture of a lesson or a lessonette, a piece of a lesson. Vignettes are those beautiful, long, about 3 pages. 3 pages each that illustrate integrated and designated, that go through a whole unit, and then piece, lots of activities, lots of pieces to it. So very good. And each chapter has loads of both. Well, one of the vignettes and then many snapshots, I should say. But again, check out different grade levels, because there's nothing that doesn't work across grade levels. I've been using a lot of kindergarten work for like working with even 5th and 6th grade teachers. There's just so much of value. Right? So if you look at those statements, again, you saw them earlier with in a prior session, which goes where?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I want to point out something about these definitions, which I like very much. May I have the remote?
You may have the remote.
Notice that in designated ELD over here, it said ELD standards are the focal standards, right? But we're still building into and from content instruction. Over here, ELD standards are used in tandem with the Common Core. Nowhere do the ELD standards take a back seat.
Yeah.
They're either in the foreground or they're tandem.
Side seat. Yeah.
All right. Our hero, Pauline Gibbons, has a wonderful thing to say about language instruction and ELs, if you'll take just a second to read it. The framework has lots to say about English learners and the multitude of powerful values, skills, et cetera, they bring to the table. And how even if you come from a place like my district where there are about 7 or 8 main languages, and then of course, 54 spoken, sort of, that even if you're not able to speak the language of your students, that you can learn about them and help the kids to use their primary language as an on-ramp into English language development. So judging them for what they do not have is far less effective. Nothing if not pragmatic. It's also not fair, and it's immoral and all those kind of things, but it's not as effective as really looking at what they bring to the table, right? That's what it's about. So we now open up, I think someone has our bulletproof vest coming very soon, and we're opening up for questions about, because the devil's in the details, and how do you implement, and what does this mean, and we will do our best, but we are not gurus, and so I'm just putting that out there.
I thought you were, Vanessa.
I keep trying to get the guru title, but they won't give it to me. Yes, ma'am.
So obviously it's a really delicate balance, preserving this designated ELD that focuses on ELD and not reteaching content, but then not isolating it from content. And I think that's where we as a district are. We've done a great job of preserving designated ELD. We're using systematic ELD, but we're moving more and more towards the instructional kits, which are more and more isolated from content. So if we're going to attempt to encourage teachers to go back to the old model of creating a weekly lesson plan and tying it to the content and seeing how it can support it, the 2 things I'm going to get shot down from my teachers are, number 1, how do I ensure that scope and sequence of the foundation of the language skills that the students need at their proficiency level, and number 2, when and how do they have the time to prepare for that?
Next.
Yeah. Anyone in the room have a quick, easy answer for that one?
Scope and sequence is easier because time is always a question. I know that.
This is what we're all going to be grappling with. We are grappling it, together.
So here's my take on it.
How's a huge district like Sac City planning for this?
So we are moving slowly with this. Our biggest real burden right now is not having some sort of curriculum for ELD. And because we don't have one yet, and we have not yet had the opportunity to help provide professional learning for all the teachers who are still getting Common Core under their belts, right? We are saying, do not throw out old ELD before you bring in the new, right? This is not what we're saying, because what we know is even this disconnected ELD is better than no ELD. But we can't stop there, clearly. So we are working to help teachers grapple with making sure that they are teaching the language necessary for Common Core. The way that we are helping to manage this, scope and sequence is one way of looking at it. If you've seen the ELD standards, while quite specific, they're also very broad. There's a lot of language encompassed within them. Is that we are really taking on the text types of the Common Core and going further and looking at genre study. Because genres are genres because they contain certain language-related elements, right? So when I'm looking at narrative, I may be teaching something very different in language than when I'm looking at informational text. Genres have language elements. There's lots written on here, and that's one way we can narrow this huge, like, what should I teach today? That kind of idea. So we actually identified, we have a curriculum map, and we had training specialists identify, here are some powerful language features that are based in the ELD standards that you can teach in this argument unit, or in this memoir unit, or in this, so they're reading memoirs. This is part of that teaching and learning cycle. Let's just say the memoir unit, right? They're reading memoirs, they're noticing the kind of language that's used in them, they're noticing the content, how they're put together, they're talking about it as they notice it in reading, and then those become writing lessons, because what do kids write at the end of the memoir unit? They write, the culminating task is a memoir. So this genre study helps narrow down the possibilities of what you're teaching. For example, noun phrases are an important element in part 2 of the ELD standards. And so where do noun phrases come into play most frequently? Science. Science has these long noun phrases, so that's the time that I'm going to really concentrate, and maybe even when I'm a narrative, I'm going to say, look at these noun phrases. They have very few adjectives. There's the head noun, and there's not much else. That's so different than what we just noticed in our informational text about ecosystems. And we're drawing these comparisons. But genre, so far, for me, as being sort of the head of this effort in helping to get people to learn about this, has been a very helpful focus for how to narrow what it is we need to teach kids. And if we are hitting a number of text types and genres within the text types, we're going to have a broader scope for language that we've taught kids.
And just to add, I was trying to pull up the Pauline Gibbons slide again. It's in there somewhere. The text that's scaffolding language, scaffolding learning, or vice versa, she has some conversation about the different text types and looking at the language features, and it's a very helpful start if this is new conversation for you. Also, the 6th grade vignette has a memoir in it. I'm just trying to add on to what you were talking about.
Yes, we have one right here, and then we'll come up to you, Brandy.
So I just, and again, don't expect an answer, because I know that we're going slowly, we're building our capacity around this, but just going back to the foundational skills question, and just going back and rereading, just being reminded that it starts with, for students enrolled in bilingual programs, that we might bring in the foundational literacy skills in, and that I know one thing that we are grappling with is, okay, newcomers. I mean, it's just really, I think it's going back to really knowing each and every student, and then knowing for newcomers, that may have to be part of their designated, right? So
right, which is stated.
Right.
So.
Yeah,
But in general.
I have it's related to that, because we work in the same school district, and we're referring to on the designated ELD sheet where you talk about what it is not. The second paragraph about foundational skills. In San Francisco, many of our ELs are in the programs in dual language immersion, two-way immersion, or are newcomers. So are you saying that foundational skills would be recommended as a focus within that context? I'm just having a hard time understanding that second paragraph, and it's so huge for us.
Well, no matter what, I would say that if you're going to do foundational skills and designated ELD, it's going to have to be an add-on. It can't take the place of language development that's connected to the core. So I don't suppose let's say you have a large group of English learners, and they're the only ones who need the foundational skills. So yeah, keep them in the group. Do some designated ELD that's tied to the content instruction, and then concentrate on that, absolutely. But what we don't want is kids getting foundational skills instead of academic language development that's tied to the core. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay.
And focusing on building up the connection between their primary language and English, or if they're learning, whatever your dual immersion programs are, the transfer.
Brandy.
I was going to go back to the text types discussions and the genre studies. So when you are developing these, is this like a team of teachers developing it? Is it grade level teams? Is it given to them at some point, like some kind of framework? All of the above.
So I have seen it done differently in every district with whom I've spoken. Yeah. In my district, we have a very thin layer of people who can work at the district office on these things. And so our curriculum maps are really a map. It's like, try to get there from here. Right? And this is maybe how you can do it. They're not like lesson plan, because we have very few people to work on these. Okay, I've seen other districts that have very nicely articulated, sequences of lessons within units.
We want the names of those districts.
My idea is the more we can do for teachers, the better off we are. But we are restricted in some ways by the people who can work on it.
I'm worried about like being linguists, right? Like sometimes be able to identify the language that's needed. And
there's a statement about that somewhere in the framework. Start hunting.
We do need teachers to know more about language than
absolutely. We all need to know more about language.
And you're right. You can get to the point like, oh my gosh, I need to know so much. But guess what? The people who really have all that are going, oh my God, I need to know so much more. It doesn't really stop. But we do absolutely need to key people into the fact that integrated ELD is not SEDAI, right? We're not talking about a set of strategies that we're using. This is content. We need to teach them how the language works and do it in ways that are meaningful. So we need to build up so our district has taken on a mantra that it's all integrated in our professional learning. So you don't go to something in our district that is around ELA or around math, because that's where we get all our money for Common Core, right? ELA and math, right? So without something around English language development in it. It just doesn't happen because teachers right now, especially at the elementary level where they're taking on 2 new subjects virtually, don't have the time to then go to the ELD thing that I provide after school or whatever. So it's all in there, and it's not separate. So that's something that I could encourage you to do in the sense that it's not enough. I don't always get enough time, because they're talking about close reads, and I'm like, okay, how can I deal with language in close reads? Okay, they're talking about, SMP3, that's perfect. Being able to argue and talk about what it is why you took the problem solution that you did. That's a perfect entry for language development. So I'm always working the angles so that teachers are getting it right along with their Common Core content. And then in secondary, it's all around like helping everyone understand integrated ELD. It's not just the English teacher doing integrated ELD, right? Mm-hmm.
And Brandy, I always add on at a county office, working with lots of districts, what we've done with districts we look at the framework and we say, how soon do you think we could see this kind of teaching that we see the examples from in the vignettes? And the conversation's about 5 years. So if that's where we want to be in 5 years, what can we do every year to get there? Because we cannot tackle it all tomorrow.
When you're working with secondary teachers, how do you address, their content, the literacy standards, and the ELD standards? Do you tend to focus more on the ELD and not the literacy? Or how do you approach that with them so they're not saying, well, every lesson I design, I have to look at 3 sets of standards?
Yes, you do. That's
right.
Well, no, I don't do that because then they kick me out.
Right, exactly.
So what I talk about is that the literacy standards are here, and the ELD standards amplify and augment them. They're like a key for people who don't know a lot about language, which is most of us teachers don't know that much about language. And if you're monolingual, you know less, okay? So we need to bolster it, and the ELD standards open the door to what kind of language we need to be teaching for the Common Core and our literacy standards. So in the writing, it can, wait, I need to deal with verbs? Okay, well, we're doing informational text, so I'm gonna let kids know that all those elementary teachers who told you use vivid verbs, use vivid verbs, use vivid verbs. Here, in this case, most of the verbs are gonna be being verbs and having verbs. The rainforest is very wet. The rainforest has a canopy, and I'm going to use this information that I know about my own profession, my own content area, to help me bolster the language. So the ELD standards, I'm always saying, okay, look at the bridging, look at the bridging. What does that tell you if you're talking about integrated ELD? What does that tell you about the language you can bring into instruction? And they still aren't happy with me, but they don't kick me out. And yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Which you can go to an ELA standard. Oh, I don't actually need that. But, you can go to an ELA standard, and then you can push ELD right next to it, and it will give you the ELD standard that bridges it. So it's a really easy tool to use or to help when you're doing that, instead of rifling through certain papers or trying to find it. So eStandards is a great tool, just so you know.
Right. Thank you very, very much for your time and attention. We appreciate it. Go ELD.